I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and I'm joined today by a prolific journalist and a frequent contributor to The New American magazine, Selwyn Duke. Selwyn, thank you for your time today.
Oh, great to be with you, Dr. Duke. And so now we have Duke and Duke, and guess what? Against the left, you and I can put up our
We
dukes.
are the Duke brothers. We just need Daisy in her shorts here, and we could have our own little Dukes of Hazzard right here. But
That's right.
silliness aside, in times like these, you need to joke because we're going through some interesting times. And you have written a great end of the year article. Who wins 2020's Phony of the Year? I love that. Talk about the before we start naming names. What are the criterion in your mind that would make somebody qualify as the year 2020's biggest phonies? What were you looking at in terms of ranking them?
Okay, well, first of all, a person has to be a phony. That's a prerequisite, but he also has to be a very effective phony. In other words, he has to have gotten over on a lot of people, fooled a lot of people. So that's very, very important. And also, if the person managed to exalt himself at the same time or be exalted by others, then that's a bonus. So that's what I was looking at.
Can't,
And if,
can't we just say Democrat Party and be done with
yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's interesting because obviously I must have missed a lot because this takes in a lot of territory when you're trying to assess all the phonies who we have in our civilization and that you have in every civilization, in fact. But what I started out with was people who I called the bodacious bookshelf boys. And basically, we've seen this phenomenon recently where, believe it or not, people of somewhat of a bit of note, let's say celebrities, pundits, what have you, are having companies make for them custom made bookshelves that they can use as a backdrop behind them when they shoot videos. So it would be right back here if I had one of these phony custom made bookshelves. And these entities that custom make the bookshelves for them actually choose the books, certain books that are supposed to lend them an air of intellectualism. So, I mean, just talk about absolute phoniness. But that was one. Another was so called Hilaria, I don't know how she pronounced her name, Baldwin, who was in the news recently, the wife of Alec Baldwin, because it was revealed that she was masquerading for about 10 years as someone who was of Spanish descent. But actually, she's a woman named Hillary Hayward Thomas from Massachusetts, I believe. Yes, Massachusetts. And not only that, not only was she masquerading, but she went the whole 9 yards. I mean, she was even feigning a Spanish accent. So she was there too, but she didn't quite make the cut.
Let me
And
say
I also,
before we
yeah,
move off of Hilaria, or if that's her name, the thing that always troubled me about her story is she wasn't even really emulating or stealing the identity of a minority. The Spanish are Europeans. They are not New Worlders. The Spanish, the conquistadors, conquered the Aztecs, for God's sake. I mean, if you're going to steal an ethnicity to try to garner actual sympathy, I mean, why would you choose the Spanish?
yeah, no, it's unbelievable. As you said, they were conquerors, and that's fine because at some point, I guess most every civilization
Right.
engaged in conquest, so we're not going to demonize them, but it is funny. And it's also funny because the left always says, well, you shouldn't engage in cultural appropriation. That's a terrible thing. In fact, white children cannot dress up as non-white characters on Halloween now. That is verboten. But meanwhile, Mrs. Baldwin was doing this for 10 years, and a lot of people seem to think it's no big deal. And really, though, it's what it tells us about our civilization. I mean, that we have so many people who have such empty lives that they don't know who they are. They lack faith. That really is the reason that they're acting this way. I mean, they don't know that they're children of God. They're not secure within themselves. So they're taking on these counterfeit personalities, these counterfeit personas. It just really is quite sad in a way, but we do see a lot of it. But she didn't make the cut, like I said. So we go on here. And one person who I also mentioned was, of course, we can't forget about her, the vice president suspect, Kamala Harris. And I mentioned her because this is a woman who is just phony through and through. I mean, she's someone who just recently, this was in the news, Dr. Duke. She ripped off something, presumably from Martin Luther King, right? She said that when she was in the crib or something and she was taken to a civil rights protest, she said to her parents, I want freedom. But there are just so many instances like that with her. I mean, with Joe Biden, of course, when they had a debate, she was slamming him mercilessly, implied that he was a racist, said that he was guilty of sexual abuse in her estimation. And then later on, when she was chosen as his vice presidential running mate, and she was asked about this by Stephen Colbert, and I know they say Colbert, I don't pronounce it that way, it's an Irish name, asked about it, she just brushed it off, giggling, and said, "It was a debate. It was a debate." In other words, this is what you do. Of course, I was going to lie in a debate. What do you think? That was just politics. So some people think that she should have been the phony of the year, but the reason why she does not get the title, Dr. Duke, is that she's not that effective of a phony. People see through her, and that's why actually she didn't do very well in the Democrat primaries. In fact, she had to drop out before the California primary because that's her home state, and she was poised to lose it. So not as bad as Bill de Blasio, who got 0% of the vote in New York City, but not too good. So now we move on to the one I call the Great Fauci. Fauci, Anthony Fauci. Now, Anthony Fauci is a phony's phony. In fact, I wrote an essay about him for the New American a while back titled The Many Masks of Anthony Fauci. And this guy, honestly, Dr. Duke, flip-flops more than a politician. I mean, if you don't like his position, you know what? Just wait a while. He'll change it. He flip-flopped on masks. He said first, oh, well, they're really not necessary. You know, they might keep a droplet out. They might help prevent a little bit, but they're not all that effective. Then later on, he started flip-flopping on that. Then he said, oh, well, I said that before because we needed to keep the masks for the healthcare workers. And then he got to a point where he insisted that it was some kind of great moral imperative that you wear a mask, even though there really is no proof that masks are highly effective at preventing transmission of the China virus. But that's not his only lie. There are so many lies, I can't mention them all during this broadcast. For instance, here's a good one. He was on TV January 21st and February 29th. And on both of those dates, Dr. Duke, he said essentially that the virus was not that big of a deal and that Americans did not need to change their behavior. Okay. Now remember when I tell you this, again, February 29th, he said that. That was one of the occasions. So then he was being interviewed by Jake Tapper on Easter Sunday, and he said that he had warned the administration in late February that the virus was a clear and present danger and that Americans needed to change their behavior. Again, I'm paraphrasing. That's not a verbatim quotation. So in other words, either he was lying when he said what he said on February 29th, when he said it was no big deal, or he was lying when he said what he said on Easter Sunday, when he claimed that he told the administration back in late February that we really needed to take action. So he is the one who gets the Phony of the Year award. And the reason for this is not only is he a quintessential phony, but he has managed to exalt himself. I mean, there are people who elevate him, Dr. Duke, like he is some kind of demigod. It's absolutely unbelievable. So yeah,
Well,
he wins
certainly
the Phony of the Year.
he talks and behaves as if he has some actual elected position, that he has some constitutional or governmental authority. It's amazing to me how many politicians, how many the Nancy, speaking of a great candidate for fake Phony of the Year, I would have put Nancy Pelosi pretty high on that list as well. Talk about cultural appropriation when she's kneeling on the Senate floor, the congressional floor, with African scarves around her neck, when she's dining from her $24,000 Sub-Zero freezer, gobbling $30 pints of ice cream, talking about wealth distribution. I mean, you got a lot to play with there with Nancy Pelosi. But the Fauci thing even goes a little further. I think you're right, because how many phonies like Nancy Pelosi are real phonies when they're kissing up to people like Fauci?
Yeah, well, Fauci has been in government actually since 1968. He's been with that bureaucracy. He could be our longest serving bureaucrat. And you don't get to be that unless you're expert at kissing derriere. That's the bottom line. Not only that, his phoniness has helped to maneuver us into one of the greatest blunders, I believe, in American history, and that's the lockdown situation. So he absolutely is the Phony of the Year. Also, I believe he's highly narcissistic. He loves being in front of the camera, and that tells you a lot, because I think on an emotional level, he has a vested interest in keeping the COVID con going. So I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him.
Selwyn Duke, thank you for your time today. I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and I'm very happy to be joined again by Selwyn Duke. Selwyn is a very prolific journalist, has published in a lot of really important outlets, and he is a regular contributor to The New American magazine. So we urge you to get the magazine and to read his online stuff as well. Very insightful. And we've got an end of the year, beginning of the new year article from you about what we can expect from the Biden administration vis-a-vis religious rights and religious liberties. I know the answer to this, and the short answer is nothing good, but you've taken the trouble of writing a very insightful article. So talk a little bit about what you see happening in the next year with regards to a Biden administration and freedom of religious liberty.
Yeah. Well, first of all, good to be with you again, Dr. Duke. And what discerning people understand is that if you look at history, what you'll see is that a recurring theme with the left is the persecution of Christianity. We saw that with the French revolutionaries. Actually, that's where the terms left and right as they pertain to the political sphere were born during the French Revolution. And we've seen that, of course, with Mao, with all of the Marxists during the 20th century. And we saw that more recently in our country. We saw that with Barack Obama, where he was trying to enforce, his administration was, secular so-called values on Christians. For instance, he was trying to force the Little Sisters of the Poor in order of nuns to fund prenatal infanticide. So there's no doubt we're going to see more of that, because that not only is in the nature of the left, but we just know what the nature of Kamala Harris, for instance, is. Now, you might say, well, Joe Biden is going to be the president, but Joe Biden is a puppet. He's an empty vessel at this point, long has been. He's largely senile. I don't believe he's going to see the second or the third year, let's put it that way, of his administration. They're going to try to move him out of there, I think, because they certainly don't want him to be the man running for re-election in 2024. So we're going to have Kamala Harris in there, and she has signaled that she's a fairly vile anti-Christian bigot. I mean, she's someone, when there was a confirmation hearing for a judge who questioned the man's Catholicism, she said, well, you belong to the Knights of Columbus, and are you aware of the fact that they're against a woman's right to choose, quote unquote? That euphemism, and to choose what, as you might say, well, what clothes to wear, what car to drive, what food to eat? No, to kill an unborn baby. But that wasn't the only thing. I mean, she's tried to attack pregnancy centers. She definitely has signaled that she's no fan of Christianity. So we're going to see more of that under the Biden-Harris administration. Now, what will they do? Well, they'll do things, for instance, like maybe trying to force bakers and other Christian businessmen and florists, things we've seen in the past, to service so-called same-sex weddings. They might be behind measures such as denying accreditation to Christian colleges and schools. Leftists have tried to do these things in the past. And what this is this is sort of, Dr. Duke, a soft tyranny. It's not Christians being thrown to the lions yet, as happened during the Roman times and the Roman Empire. It's not the kind of tyranny that you saw under the Soviet Union yet, or in China today, where they haul you off and you end up in some kind of gulag. But it's basically what we saw in Hungary during the Cold War days. And I remember some years ago, I read this article written by a fellow who had been there, and he was on a tour, and the tour guide said to them, the Hungarian communists had a very interesting way of dealing with the Christians. They didn't say you couldn't be Christian. No, you could be, but you couldn't be Christian and be successful. That was how they handled it. And we're seeing the same thing in our time. You don't have to guess that this is going to transpire, because it's already occurred, as I've indicated. I mean, we've seen in the past, like I said, trying to compel Christian businessmen to act contrary to their own most deeply held beliefs, trying to deny accreditation, like I said, to Christian schools. Now, when you do this, what you're basically saying is the same thing. You can be Christian, or you can be successful. And this lies in stark contrast to how the Trump administration has behaved. I pointed out, Dr. Duke, in my article that when Trump was running, and even now, no one could ever mistake him for a desert mystic. I mean, the man's a billionaire playboy. But if you look at it, he has been a staunch defender of religious liberty. And I point out in my article, this is absolutely striking. His White House commemorated the 850th anniversary of the martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket. Becket was killed in 1170 by supporters of King Henry II because he didn't want to yield to secular intrusion into the church realm. But here's the thing. Here is one quotation that we found in the White House's proclamation. Now, I'm going to read it amidst two other quotations from the founding fathers. And let's see if anyone can detect which one Trump's is, if it's out of place at all. Quote, "The only foundation for a republic is to be laid in religion." Quote, "Bad men cannot make good citizens. It is when a people forget God that tyrants forge their chains." And quote, "A society without religion cannot prosper. A nation without faith cannot endure, because justice, goodness, and peace cannot prevail without the grace of God." Okay, which came from Trump's White House? Well, the last one did. And it's striking when you see a modern leader make a proclamation like this. And I understand someone else probably wrote it, but Trump's name is on it, so it's highly significant. And that has characterized his administration. But we're not going to see that now with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in office. And I have to say, why does the left do this? Why do they attack Christianity in this way? Well, one simple reason, and a lot of people are aware of this, is that the state cannot be people's highest power if God is, right? And the state's laws cannot be preeminent if God's laws are in the people's minds and hearts. Because if the people worship God, then when the state's laws conflict with God's laws, the people are going to say, no, no, we may have an obligation to the state, but your authority ends where God's authority begins, where God's laws begin. And the state doesn't want that. The state wants to be all powerful. And this is especially true of these Democrats we're getting in office because so many of them are megalomaniacs, excuse me. They're power mongers. And Kamala Harris fits that mold to a T. I mean, she is the kind of person who would crawl over dead bodies to achieve power. There's no question about it. If you look at her history, you can see that very, very clearly. I mean, this is a woman who used to be Willie Brown's mistress in California. He was a big man in politics there. That's how she got her start. She slept her way to the middle. What I call cultural affirmative action took her the rest of the way. Then, of course, the Democrat establishment chose her for Joe Biden. So this is what we're seeing. Now, this is not the only reason, though, that Democrats, or I should say the left, attacks Christianity, not just because they want the state to be preeminent. There's another reason. Remember that when people do things, Dr. Duke, they generally do them for emotional reasons, more than we might like to think, more than they are governed by reason. And leftists tend to have this visceral antipathy for Christianity for a very, very simple reason. I point this out in my article. Leftists are people who are characterized by vice. Now, when I say this, understand we're all sinners. I get it. But many of us try to fight against our sin. We look to God and we accept the grace of God and we hope that that will mitigate our sin. But leftists are people who wallow in vice. They try to spread it. That's why they've been the authors of the sexual devolution, as I've called it. But here's the whole thing. When you are married to sin, you're not going to like any moral standard that labels your sin as sin and that condemns it as sin and that maybe even says, if you don't straighten out your act, you could be heading for a very, very bad place. Well, Christianity does erect a moral standard just like that. And that is the visceral reason why so many leftists have always, always hated Christianity and have striven to destroy it. Because if Christianity is right, they are absolutely wrong. If Christianity is right, they will absolutely be rejected if Christianity reigns in the hearts and minds of the population. And they cannot tolerate that. That's why the Bible says we have eyes blinded by sin, because sin really does that to you. So that's a motivation that a lot of people aren't aware of. But I've heard this expressed in so many ways. I mean, I remember years ago, I was listening to a talk show and this caller called in, and you know what she said? She said she used to have this Christian tenant, but she kicked the person out because the person, quote, made her feel bad about herself. So that's an example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've long thought that Christianity, too, was the main adversary of socialism because of Christianity's emphasis on individual redemption, not collective. The Christianity in America today is the single greatest force advocating individuality over collectivism. It's always been that way, and so we have to keep that in mind as well. So I really appreciate your time today, Selwyn. Really some important things to think about in this new year. Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless.